Before we begin this touching story, please subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon so you never miss our emotional stories that warm your heart and restore your faith in humanity. The morning sun cast golden glow over Windsor Castle as tourists gathered outside the famous gates. It was a typical Saturday in late spring, and the crowd had grown larger than usual. Among them stood Princess Charlotte, a young royal who had accompanied her mother on what was meant to be a quiet visit to see the changing of the guard. The 8-year-old princess wore a simple blue dress and had her hair tied back neatly. She stood close to her mother, watching the guards with fascination as they performed their duties with precision and grace, the royal guard standing. Nearest to them was a young man named Thomas Bennet. He had served in the position for only 6 months, but he took his duty seriously. His red uniform was immaculate, and his tall bearskin hat sat perfectly on his head. Thomas stood completely still, his eyes fixed forward as he had been trained to do. He knew that no matter what happened around him, he must remain like a statue. This was the tradition, and he was proud to uphold it. Charlotte watched Thomas with curiosity. She had seen guards before, but something about his dedication impressed her. She noticed how he did not blink or move even when a bee flew near his face. She admired his strength and discipline. Her mother had explained to her many times how these guards were real soldiers who protected the royal family and the country. They were not just for show, though many tourists treated them that way. As the minutes passed, the crowd grew restless. Some people started taking pictures, which was normal. But then a group of teenagers pushed their way to the front. They were laughing loudly and seemed to be looking for entertainment. Charlotte noticed them immediately. Something about their behavior made her uncomfortable. They did not seem to have the respect that others showed. One of them, a tall boy with messy hair, pointed at Thomas and said something to his friends. They all laughed. Charlotte frowned but said nothing yet. The boy stepped closer to Thomas, pulling out his phone. He started making faces next to the guard, trying to get a reaction. His friends encouraged him, shouting suggestions. Other tourists watched with mixed reactions. Some smiled nervously, while others looked uncomfortable but did nothing. The boy grew bolder. He waved his hand in front of Thomas's face. He made silly sounds. He even pretended to march like a soldier in a mocking way. Through all of this, Thomas remained perfectly still. His jaw was tight, and if you looked closely, you could see the tension in his shoulders, but he did not move or speak. This was his duty. Charlotte watched with growing concern. She tugged on her mother's sleeve, but her mother was speaking quietly with a security officer about their schedule. The young princess looked back at Thomas and the teenagers. The situation was getting worse. Now the boy was standing directly in front of Thomas, blocking his view and making rude gestures. His friends recorded everything on their phones, laughing at what they thought was harmless fun. But Charlotte saw something different. She saw a man being disrespected while doing his job. She saw someone who could not defend himself being treated poorly. And something inside her 8-year-old heart told her this was wrong. Charlotte felt her heart beating faster as she watched the scene unfold. The tall boy had now placed his face just inches from Thomas's, staring at him and making strange noises. The crowd around them had grown silent. Some people pulled out their phones to record what was happening. Others looked away, embarrassed, but unwilling to intervene. Charlotte noticed an elderly woman shaking her head in disapproval, but even she remained quiet. The young princess understood why people were not speaking up. Sometimes it felt easier to look away than to get involved. But Charlotte had been raised with certain values. Her parents had taught her about kindness, respect, and standing up for what is right. They had explained that with privilege comes responsibility. She remembered her father telling her that true leadership means protecting those who cannot protect themselves. She thought about all the times she had been told she was lucky to be born into the royal family. Now she understood that this luck came with a duty to use her position for good. The teenager reached out and tapped Thomas's chest, trying to provoke him. Still, the guard did not react. His training was excellent, but Charlotte could see the slight redness in his face. She could tell he was struggling inside, fighting every instinct to respond. The boy's friends laughed louder, and one of them shouted encouragement to push the boundaries even further. That was when Charlotte made her decision. She let go of her mother's hand and stepped forward. Her small figure moved through the crowd with surprising determination. People noticed her immediately, though at first they did not recognize who she was. They simply saw a young girl with a serious expression walking toward the commotion. Charlotte's security officer started to follow her, but she raised her hand slightly, a gesture she had seen her grandmother make many times. The officer paused, understanding that the princess wanted to handle this herself. Charlotte walked right up to the group of teenagers. The tall boy did not notice her at first. He was too busy entertaining his friends and showing off for the cameras. But when Charlotte stopped directly beside him, something made him look down. His eyes met hers, and he saw a young girl staring at him with a mixture of disappointment and courage. There was something in her gaze that made him uncomfortable. Before he could say anything, Charlotte spoke. Her voice was clear and steady. It's much stronger than anyone would expect from someone her age. She told him that what he was doing was wrong. She explained that the guard was a real soldier who served their country with honor. She said that making fun of someone who cannot respond is not bravery, but cowardice. She pointed out that behind the uniform was a real person with feelings, family, and dignity. Her words were simple, but powerful. The teenagers stood frozen, unsure how to respond. The crowd around them had gone completely silent. Everyone was watching this small girl stand up to teenagers much older than herself. The boy's face turned red, but this time not from laughter. He looked around and saw that people were no longer amused. Instead, they were looking at him with disapproval. Some were nodding in agreement with Charlotte's words. He mumbled something under his breath and took a step back. His friends, sensing the mood had changed, also stepped away. One of them even lowered his phone, suddenly ashamed of what they had been recording. Charlotte did not move. She continued to stand there, making sure they understood the message. After the teenagers backed away, Charlotte turned to face Thomas. The guard still stood at attention, his eyes fixed forward, but something had changed in his expression. Though he maintained his discipline, there was a softness around his eyes that had not been there before. Charlotte looked up at him with respect and gave him a small, reassuring smile. She wanted him to know that someone had seen his struggle and valued his service. She wanted him to know that he mattered. Then Charlotte did something that no one expected. She straightened her posture, brought her small hand to her forehead, and gave Thomas a proper military salute. It was not perfect in technique, but it was filled with genuine respect and admiration. The gesture was so pure and heartfelt that it touched everyone who witnessed it. The crowd, which had been silent, suddenly erupted in applause. People started clapping and cheering, not for entertainment, but in support of what Charlotte had done. Thomas, following protocol, could not return the salute or speak while on duty. But those who stood close enough saw a single tear roll down his cheek. It was a tear of gratitude and relief. For months, he had endured various forms of harassment while on duty. Most days it was just annoying, but some days it hurt. Today had been heading toward one of those painful days until this young girl had stepped in. He had no idea who she was at that moment, focused as he was on maintaining his composure. But he felt her kindness deeply. Charlotte's mother had finally noticed what was happening. She had been about to intervene when she saw her daughter already handling the situation. Pride swelled in her chest as she watched Charlotte defend the guard. This was the kind of person she and her husband hoped their daughter would become. When Charlotte returned to her side, her mother knelt down and hugged her gently. She whispered words of pride in her daughter's ear. Charlotte simply nodded, feeling that she had only done what anyone should do. The crowd began to disperse slowly, but many people approached Charlotte and her mother. They thanked the young princess for her bravery. Several veterans in the crowd were particularly moved. One old man, who had served in the military 50 years ago, shook Charlotte's hand and told her she had restored his faith in the younger generation. A woman with her own children told Charlotte that she had taught everyone an important lesson about courage and compassion. Charlotte accepted their words graciously, but remained humble. Meanwhile, the teenagers who had been harassing Thomas had disappeared into the crowd. But the incident was not over for them. Several people in the crowd had recorded Charlotte's intervention, and by that evening, the videos had spread across social media. Millions of people watched as the young princess stood up for the guard. Comments poured in from around the world, praising her courage and maturity. Many people pointed out that she had shown more character in those few minutes than many adults show in a lifetime. The next morning, newspapers across the nation featured the story on their front pages. Headlines spoke of the young princess who had defended a royal guard against harassment. Television news programs discussed the incident, with commentators praising both Charlotte's actions and the important message they sent about respect and dignity. Child psychology experts were interviewed, and they noted how remarkable it was for someone so young to show such moral courage. The story resonated with people because it reminded them that doing the right thing does not require age or authority, just a good heart inside Kensington Palace. Charlotte's parents sat with her at breakfast the morning after the incident. Her father looked at the newspapers spread across the table and smiled at his daughter. He told her how proud he was, not just because she had done something kind, but because she had done it without thinking about cameras or publicity. She had acted purely because it was right. Charlotte's mother added that standing up for others, especially those who cannot defend themselves, is one of the most important qualities a person can have. Charlotte listened to her parents, felt slightly overwhelmed by all the attention. She had not expected her actions to become such a big story. She told her parents that she had simply felt bad for Thomas and wanted to help him. She explained that she remembered what they had taught her about treating everyone with respect, regardless of their job or position. Her father nodded and explained that this was exactly why her actions mattered so much. In a world where people often looked away from injustice, she had chosen to step forward. That afternoon, Charlotte received an unexpected visitor. Thomas Bennet, the guard she had defended, had been granted permission to meet her. He arrived in his regular military uniform, not the ceremonial one he wore on duty. When he entered the room where Charlotte waited with her parents, he stood at attention and saluted properly. Charlotte's father returned the salute and invited Thomas to sit down. The young soldier looked nervous but grateful for the opportunity. Thomas spoke directly to Charlotte, thanking her for what she had done. He explained that being a royal guard was an honor, but it came with challenges that most people did not understand. He told her that guards were trained to endure harassment without responding, but that did not mean it did not affect them. He shared that there were days when the disrespect made him question whether the job was worth it. But what Charlotte had done had reminded him why he served. He said that knowing someone understood and valued his sacrifice made all the difference. Charlotte listened carefully to Thomas's words. She asked him questions about his training and his experiences as a guard. She wanted to understand what his life was like. Thomas answered honestly, describing both the pride and the difficulties of his position. He told her about the long hours standing perfectly still, the physical demands of the job, and yes, the occasional rudeness from tourists who saw guards as props rather than people. Charlotte's parents listened too. They thanked Thomas for his service and dedication. Before Thomas left, Charlotte gave him something. She had drawn a picture that morning of a guard standing tall and proud, with a small girl saluting beside him. At the bottom, she had written in careful handwriting, "Thank you for protecting us. You are a hero." Thomas accepted the drawing with emotion clear on his face. He promised to treasure it always. As he left the palace, he felt renewed pride in his position. One small act of kindness from a child had restored his faith in what he did. The meeting between Charlotte and Thomas was kept private initially, but palace officials eventually shared a brief statement about it. The public loved learning that the princess had personally thanked the guard. It added another layer to the story and showed that Charlotte's kindness was not just a one-time gesture, but reflected her genuine character. Schools across the country began using the incident as a teaching tool, discussing with students the importance of standing up against bullying and showing respect for others. In the weeks following the incident, something remarkable happened. Reports from Windsor Castle and other royal locations indicated a significant decrease in harassment of guards. Tourists who might have previously thought it was funny to bother the guards now hesitated. Many people had been moved by Charlotte's actions and realized that their entertainment came at the cost of someone's dignity. Families visiting the castles could be heard reminding their children to be respectful. Some even followed Charlotte's example and thanked the guards for their service. The military community across the nation was deeply touched by what had happened. Senior officers wrote letters to Charlotte's parents, expressing gratitude for raising a daughter who understood the sacrifice of service members. Veteran organizations invited the royal family to their events, wanting to celebrate the values Charlotte had demonstrated. Active duty soldiers and their families shared the story widely. Feeling that someone had finally stood up for them in a meaningful way, Charlotte's school teachers noticed a change in her classmates too. Children who had heard about what she did started thinking more about how they treated others. Instances of bullying in her school decreased as students remembered the lesson Charlotte had taught. Teachers incorporated discussions about respect, courage, and standing up for others into their lessons. Charlotte became an example not because she wanted attention, but because her simple act had touched something important in people's hearts. However, Charlotte herself remained remarkably unchanged by all the praise. She continued with her normal routine of school, family time, and royal duties appropriate for her age. When friends or family mentioned the incident, she would smile, but quickly change the subject. She did not want to be defined by one moment, even though it had been an important one. Her parents appreciated her humility and made sure she understood that true character is shown consistently, not just in public moments. Several months after the incident, Charlotte attended a military ceremony with her family. It was an event honoring soldiers for their bravery and service. When Charlotte entered, something unexpected happened. The soldiers, unprompted, began to applaud. It started with a few and grew until the entire assembly was clapping. They were showing their appreciation for the young princess who had defended one of their own. Charlotte looked surprised and a bit embarrassed, but she smiled and waved politely. Her father whispered to her that she had earned their respect through her actions. At the ceremony, Charlotte was introduced to several soldiers and their families. She listened to their stories with genuine interest. She asked questions and showed real empathy when they discussed the challenges of military life. One soldier's daughter, about Charlotte's age, told her that her father had been bullied while standing guard, and seeing Charlotte's actions had made her father feel better. The girl thanked Charlotte for standing up for people like her dad. Charlotte hugged the girl and told her that her father was brave and deserved respect. The impact of Charlotte's actions extended beyond just the immediate situation. Child development experts noted that children who saw her example were learning important lessons about moral courage. Parents reported that their children were more likely to stand up against bullying after hearing Charlotte's story. Schools implemented programs teaching students about respect and intervention when they witnessed wrongdoing. Charlotte had unintentionally started a movement toward greater kindness and courage among young people. As time passed, the incident became part of Charlotte's story and identity. But it was not the only thing that defined her. She continued to grow, learn, and develop her own interests and passions. However, the experience had changed her in subtle ways. She had learned that one person, even a young one, could make a difference. She had discovered that courage did not mean being unafraid, but rather acting despite fear or uncertainty. And she had seen firsthand how a small act of kindness could ripple outward and touch countless lives. Years later, when Charlotte was old enough to understand the full impact of what she had done, she would reflect on that day with mixed feelings. She was glad she had helped Thomas and sent a message about respect and dignity, but she also realized that she had simply been lucky to be in a position where her voice was heard. She knew that ordinary children stood up for others every day without recognition. This understanding kept her humble and motivated her to continue using her platform for good. Thomas Bennett continued his military career and eventually became a trainer for new royal guards. He made sure to teach recruits not just about standing still and following protocol, but also about the dignity of their position and the importance of mental resilience. He always kept Charlotte's drawing in his office, and he would sometimes share the story with new guards to remind them why their service mattered. He told them that even when they felt invisible or taken for granted, someone was noticing and appreciating their sacrifice. The teenagers who had harassed Thomas were never publicly identified, which was probably for the best. However, those who knew them said the incident had affected them deeply. Being called out by a child younger than themselves had been a wake-up call. Some of them later volunteered with veterans organizations or worked to combat bullying in their communities. While they could not undo what they had done, they could learn from it and try to be better people going forward. Charlotte's relationship with the military remained strong throughout her life. She made it a priority to visit soldiers, thank them for their service, and support military families. Her childhood action had created a genuine connection with the armed forces, and she honored that connection through continued engagement. She understood that respect was not just a one-time gesture, but an ongoing commitment to valuing others. The story of Charlotte and the Guard became one of those rare moments that everyone seemed to remember. People would ask each other, "Do you remember when Princess Charlotte stood up for that guard?" It became a cultural touchstone, referenced in discussions about character, courage, and kindness. Books were written analyzing what the incident revealed about society, childhood development, and the power of moral action. But at its heart, it remained a simple story about a young girl who saw someone being hurt and decided to help. Looking back, what made Charlotte's action so powerful was not just what she did, but why she did it. She had not been seeking attention or praise. She had not calculated the consequences or worried about how others would react. She had simply seen injustice and responded with compassion and courage. In a complicated world full of difficult problems, her action reminded people that sometimes the solution was straightforward. Notice when someone needs help, and then help them. The incident taught many lessons, but perhaps the most important was this: you are never too young, too small, or too powerless to make a difference. Every person has the ability to stand up for what is right. Every person can choose kindness over cruelty, courage over cowardice, and action over indifference. Charlotte had shown that true nobility has nothing to do with titles or positions. It comes from the heart, from the choice to see others' humanity and protect their dignity. And that is a lesson that stayed with everyone who heard her story, inspiring them to be a little braver, a little kinder, a little more willing to speak up when it mattered most.